into the realm of the king of the south, who shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. Is that how far you wanted me to go?
Yes, very good. Thank you so much. So a lot of this is very much settled history. This is all stuff that did come to pass. Three more kings arose in Persia. If I can quickly try to pull up this Lutheran Study Bible, but it's the three kings who were between King Cyrus and King Xerxes. And if you know King Xerxes, he was the king who first, kind of achieved some victories over Greece. I think the Battle of Marathon, the Battle of Thermopylae in history, if you know the movie Sparta 300, this is Sparta. That's
Richard
the.
Pops to mind there. Richard would give us all the history.
Richard could tell us all about the Battle of Marathon. Is famous because a Greek soldier ran all the way back to Athens and to tell them what happened, and he collapsed and died. But that's where we get the word marathon from. That's why people who run a lot. That's anyway. But the other battle, it was a defeat, for the Spartans, but they held their ground. Eventually, though the tides would turn with Alexander. And this is exactly what happened. As you can see here in verse 2, the kings of Persia, the fourth shall be far richer than all of them. And that's what, King Xerxes was known for. And when he had become strong enough through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdoms of Greece. And Greece was not united at this time. Then a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. Alexander, and as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom, because as soon as Alexander stopped conquering, and if you read the accounts, he started in, conquering Greece. He had a campaign to kind of, teach the Persians a lesson. They were stunningly successful just because Alexander was a very brilliant strategist. He was able to beat the Persians, conquer their empire, and he said that wasn't enough. He went, he took over Egypt, and that wasn't enough. He went all the way to Greece, to India on the Indus River. And while he was on the Indus River, he would have probably gone further, except his soldiers were wearing the same armor that they had when they started. It was all in tatters, and they said this has to be the end of this campaign. But, it was quite a run. And as, it seemed as soon as he finished, he passed away. The story is it was at a banquet, and, he passed away. We don't really, know what happened there. It sounds like maybe he was poisoned, but history doesn't agree.
He got eaten by an alligator.
I don't think he got eaten by an alligator. That we could rule out definitively. August is joining us, so welcome to all who are on, by the way, on the live stream. It is on now. I want to apologize. We just had a little bit of difficulty getting started this morning with the weather and interference and all that, but we're on now. So the So afterwards, as soon as he rose, the kingdom was broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. Again, this is all kind of boring history, I know to some, but this refers, I think, to the Ptolemaic kingdom of Alexandria, which is why there's a city called Alexandria in Egypt. It's because of that conquest. The empire gets divided. Out of this southern empire, I think it's a king of Syria arises. And his name is Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. And he was actually, if you read the book of Maccabees, this is the king who does great harm to the Jewish people. He kind of all but makes it illegal for them to practice their, religion undefiled. He sets up, I think the worst thing he does is he sets up sacrifices to Zeus in the temple, which, obviously is something that Daniel, likens here, not just to this king. There's an extra element to this text because as oppressive, as horrible as Antiochus was, he was just a human king. And the fact is his reign came to an end. The Jews were able to actually rebel and win against him and set up the Hasmonean dynasty. That's where Herod comes from. So they reestablished the kings of Israel, although not in as great of a place of power as they were before. But what Daniel really is referring to here, especially when we hear about how terrible this king will be, it's not just him exaggerating. He's looking towards the end, towards that figure we talked about a lot last time, Antichrist. So we are getting into end times. So we talked a lot about the Antichrist. I think we should just continue to look and see, well, what is the point? And as you may remember, the point that Daniel is making throughout this book is that God is in control, right? Nebuchadnezzar thought he was in charge. He was humbled. And now in this part of the vision, Daniel's being given a short kind of list of things that will happen in the history of the Jewish people. But there's a greater element to it, one that we get introduced to us. Remember when Michael appeared, saying that he would fight these princes. There's a spiritual warfare element to it. So what we have really is an end times prophecy that's going to unveil. So let's just continue. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. And then the latter shall come up into his realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. So again, without getting lost in the details, we're being told about just the kind of the back and forth. I don't think we actually have gotten to Antiochus. I think that's in verse 13. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come with a great army and abundant supply. So we're being given kind of the point by point of these major historical milestones. I have to kind of pull. Does anyone have any notes in their study Bibles about any of this? Because without understanding the exacts to the history, it's kind of difficult for us to understand what exactly is going on. Just that Daniel is, giving us a prophecy. All these things would come to pass. I know you're looking at me with a mouth wide open, Frank.
My academics ended 50 years, 60 years ago, and now I know why I loved American history and why I distasted world history. Because world history is
lots of details. If
complicated.
It is very complicated. If you're the kind of person who can dive into, I wish John Hartman were here. He seems like he's much better than me even at keeping track of all of the small details here. So I'll start up I couldn't find, of all the notes I have on Daniel, I could not find my notes for Daniel 11.
10, 11, and 13.
Yeah.
Sirius suggests by his son, Sirius III and Antiochus, a large part of Israel was captured in response of Palmotry V of Egypt and went to war against Antiochus III. After Antiochus lost 7,000 men in battle at Raphia in 217 before Christ, he raised up even a larger army to invade Ptolemy's kingdom. I don't know how to pronounce those names right because I pronounce them different in my English and in this English.
So, yeah, the Ptolemaic and the Syrian kingdoms, which were Alexander's kind of, it wasn't his children, they were kind of generals and other figures, took over these four kingdoms that Alexander established. This was a period, by the way, that was mostly peaceful. This is when the Silk Road starts to really become a thing in the ancient world. There's a trade of ideas. It's kind of the first time that the East and the West communicate. And that was partially Alexander's doing. And you see the cultural influence goes all the way to Egypt. Statues of Buddha, actually, the closer you get to Greece, the more they look like Greek statues. They take quite a bit of influence and trade ideas. Here, though, we have a war between the Ptolemaic kingdom, that's Egypt, and the Syrian kingdom, right? And they trade blows with one another. And what this is building up towards is this figure, Antiochus Epiphanes, who is described in the book of Maccabees. We'll read on in a moment to see that, if we read it literally, it doesn't match with history. It gets to a point where it moves from history to far off prophecy. And that's the key point. So let's read on if we can.
Okay, I'll read. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city. And the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, with destruction in his hand. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the cup covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time, and he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land.
All right, that's fine, yes. So finally we get towards the end there to the rise of this figure, Antiochus Epiphanes. I know that, this really is a lot of stuff. You just have to trust me when I say the note here is that it does correspond to history. And the only explanations we have are either, what the secular world presents, and that, it's impossible that Daniel is older than Alexander. We have good reason to believe, though, that if it happened after Alexander actually arose, it wouldn't have been written in Aramaic, because the language changes from, it's kind of interesting. All the books of the Old Testament except this are written in Hebrew. This book, though, is written in Aramaic, which is the language of Babylon. It's related to Hebrew. All of these languages are very similar, and that's why, you'll even see, people claiming that, even the name Yahweh, which is the name of the God of Israel, was used other places. And it's because those languages are all the same. The words have the same meaning. God gave Moses this name, I am is probably the root meaning of it. It's probably a very ancient word that describes being. I think the way that my Hebrew professor said, I am that I am, it's really more, I am the one who is, right? The way that we see it in Revelation is Jesus reveals himself as he's the one who is, was, and will be to come. So the one who is in perpetuity, who always exists.
Sorry, if I did direct translation in my Afrikaans Bible, it says I is, like I is.
Yeah, it uses the word is, present, which is, not just the present time, but it's kind of a durative. It's it has duration. It means that it's, August is reading his book, or what are you doing right now, buddy? Well, you want to sit next to Merida, buddy? Or do you want to play with some toys? You can grab some toys and play with them.
Come and join.
Or join us.
You can bring a coloring book and color in your piece of paper and write something.
But what we see eventually rising up, and we'll skip a little bit ahead, is the one who rises up, who's bent towards evil, the one who kind of comes in deceitfully using flattery. Where was that? What verse was that? I'm trying to find it.
21.
Starting at verse 21. There shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. This describes Antiochus, and he takes over the kingdom of Israel. As soon, it seems like, it's not long. They welcome Alexander, but eventually, they're kind of they're allowed to be somewhat autonomous, but, there's Hellenizing in the culture that goes on at this time. Eventually, though, Antiochus, he really tries to set his mark. This is going to be Greek. It's not going to be, Jewish anymore. And establish sacrifices. And so the prince of the covenant at this time, the word used is not king, so it's interesting. It's as if God is already saying that the kingdom is done with. For a time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for plot shall be devised against him. And even those who eat his food shall break with him, his army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So, I don't know why my program here is not working today. LSB. Yeah, I feel like this might be it because it's less the computer, it's a web app that I'm using, so it could just be that could be the devil, who knows. Although I said that yesterday after FSU lost, and that's dangerous thinking right there. So okay. So he makes an alliance with Ptolemy the Sixth of Egypt, and only a small amount of people stood by this guy Antiochus at first. But then eventually they both come into this alliance, and what happens is quite interesting. Antiochus is able to take power. So let's not kind of miss the... It's tempting to get lost in the forest through the weeds. All of these things happened in history. That's the entire, thing. There were really kings that fit this description to a T. These kings, conspired. They even took over, Israel, the land that is Israel and Judea, Jerusalem. So
it says here also they serve their own interests. And that's exactly what these people always do.
Right.
All the political parties, it's all about their own interests. It's not about...
I mean, and really, if there's any value to be gained from this, it's kind of an object lesson in how politicians usually act, and
all in their interests.
here's the thing. God gives us government, though, as a blessing. It's a blessing to have a good government, a good, leader, because it allows there to be peaceful lands. It allows the church to continue to do its work. It allows families to be safe. The church has a hard time getting by, when there's war, when there's chaos, when people are displaced, when the families have to split apart. What normally is a good thing when these rulers act in their own self-interest, it causes suffering. I think, what verse did you stop at?
29.
29. Let's continue on, because it's building up.
At the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action, and the wise among the people shall make many understand. though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end. For it still awaits the appointed time. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished. For what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his father, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses, with the help of the foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price.
So we'll stop there, and we only have a few more minutes to talk about it. We won't finish the chapter, but here is where we get the shift. Right now, our heads are spinning because it's a history textbook. It's interesting. The thing that we can point to is that we believe that this was written before the history happened. It's prophecy, and this prophecy all came true. Even to verse, as we started here, things change, and now, after this foreign affair arises, at this time the many of the Jews start Hellenizing themselves. The book of Maccabees even describes this, how a lot of Jews hid their circumcision so that they looked like Greeks. I don't know how you hide your circumcision, and there's only 4 guys. I don't think this is a topic appropriate for Bible study, but it happened. And it's because they wanted to fit in. This is what brings a rise to the Sadducees, who, in order to be more appealing to the Greeks, they say there's no such thing as a Messiah. There's just a messianic age. They say that the miracles didn't happen in the Old Testament and they were impossible. That's why this group, who were mostly so if you think about the scribes and the Pharisees of Jesus' day, the scribes were the Pharisees. The priests were usually from this party of the Sadducees, who were very, they didn't really believe in a lot of the miracles or promises. And so that's why they were offended by Jesus, because here he was saying he was the Messiah that they didn't believe in, and he was doing miracles, which they didn't believe in. But back to this point, after a while, things don't go as well for Antiochus against Ptolemy, so he turns back to Jerusalem. And this is where we get the abomination that makes desolation, which Jesus refers to, when he is talking about the destruction of the temple. It's a callback to this king. And what this king does is he sets up sacrifices on the altar for Zeus. And this causes, unfortunately, it's unfortunate that this happens, but it does. That's the spark that allows some of the Jews to rebel back. And these are the Hasmoneans, which is led by a man named Judas Maccabeus. And Judas Maccabeus, he has victory over Antiochus enough that they're able to retake Jerusalem. If you know the story of Hanukkah that is often told today, the oil and the lamps. Now there's an older tradition that dates it back to the time of when they retook the temple just after Daniel. So did it really happen? We don't know, because it's not actually scripture. It's not actually recorded for us. It's just a historical fact that we have to say, well, is it real? I don't know. Yes.
I want to ask, I think that the temple was constructed on the same day at the same time twice. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that would be the events of Ezra and Nehemiah, where they are able to, secure favor. But this is dealing with Persia, with Cyrus. It doesn't ever get to Alexander before we go from Old Testament to New Testament. And what happens there is that, there's a plot, and it eventually the temple is rebuilt. It's not as great as the first temple, but that's kind of the first time that Hanukkah becomes a real big thing amongst the Jewish people. It was a more minor feast before, but it has a more patriotic, it becomes their 4th of July, essentially. Even to this day, amongst Jewish people.
Yeah, they still celebrate it over our Christmas time. I think they have
Yeah.
and the oil that burned for 7 or 8 days. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of oil that never stopped burning. Yeah.
But verse 35, things change. And the king shall do as he wills. In verse 36, we're no longer talking about history. We're talking about prophecy. We move on from talking about this figure who really existed, who did horrible things, caused a lot of desolation, a lot of grief for the Jewish people. But now we get a figure who exalts and magnifies himself above every god and speaks astonishing things against the God of God, so against the Lord himself. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. This is an interesting note, because the way that this actually gets translated in the Greek Septuagint, it almost implies that this is actually, if I can find the note here, I don't have it here, but it might actually be that it's the desire of women. So he shuns the desire of women. So it's not just someone who's loved by women. He says that you can't marry anymore. You're no longer allowed to be married. So basically he's suppressing natural affection that leads to marriage. That's the Lutheran Study Bibles note. And I tend towards this because there is a historical figure who ends up fitting the bill of this. Luther, when he read this, he said, yes, to a point, this talks about this history that happens. And Luther says it's well agreed that it goes all the way from the time of Cyrus all the way up to Antiochus IV. Daniel predicts it. But then, this figure, Luther says, is the Antichrist. And if you think about a figure who lived in Luther's time who forbid marriage, at least among certain people, that was the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church of the time. In fact, at this time, it was preferable to not be married, which, Paul says, but it was almost as if you received an extra special grace if you renounced marriage and took on a monastic life, or you became a priest, and you lived a life of celibacy. It was, very much important. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. The Lutheran reformers saw these verses referring, and he thought, this is really about what? The indulgences that were asked of people and were used to build St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Still standing to this day. It was built by a lot of donations given to them in exchange for time off in purgatory. And here's where we have to be, pretty secure in saying, confessionally, Lutherans say that, the figure of the Antichrist that is described here matches to the office of the Pope. It's someone from within who despises the Lord of Lords by establishing his own doctrines as opposed to what the church teaches. This is not me saying that any pope in particular is condemned, especially among some of the more modern popes, since Vatican II, there's been a push there to, try to reconcile things with different churches. And it's even to the point where many Catholics say, well, if the Pope says something and it's not ex cathedra, then you don't have to listen to it. Happens a lot these days with Pope Francis,
changed our Father. His change was the prayer. He changed the prayer of our Father in heaven. He took out, deliver us from evil, because he says there is no evil. God won't put us into temptation.
Right. So, and here's the thing. It's the very office of the papacy that is the problem. It's one person having the authority to overwrite, the words of the Lord's Prayer itself. That itself should say, he's speaking things, astonishing things against the God of gods. And yet this is par for the course. So what I'm saying is that rather than us trying to look at, what's happening with the UN and soldiers on the ground and what's happening in the Middle East, realize that a lot of this, in some ways, it refers to a religious figure who has also political power. And a lot of these things did happen. So, the Reformation take on this is that the Antichrist kind of in their day, the spirit of the Antichrist was found in the papacy. That's not saying that, the end hasn't come yet. So the papacy continues, but, we can say that it's not the same as it was before. Point being that as we continue to read on, at this point we get to the Antichrist. He's establishing his own rules. He's basically forbidding, worship of the true God in the way that God intended it. All of this is just simply telling us that, these things will happen, and there will be, other figures that fit this bill coming there. If you read some literature, there's this end-time Antichrist that we'll see. The important thing to remember is that in spite of this, as time goes on, evil rulers will persecute God's people. That's always going to be a reality. Maybe even today in the church, we should take notes from this, that when the church faces persecution, it's something we're told we should expect. What is the key here? Well, it's to remember that it's only for a time. Each paragraph here, there's an emphasis that it's only for the appointed times that these rulers stay in place. And in the midst of this turmoil, we get a peace that the world cannot give. Why? Because we know that there's a greater king above all of these other kings, the Lord himself, and the one who God sends. So as we continue, we're going to continue to finish this prediction about the Antichrist, but we have to keep in mind that all of this is to remind us that God is still going to be with his people through these difficult times. The church still continues. Even to this day, after, hundreds of years of the Reformation, people wonder, will the Lutheran Church survive in America? The answer is, well, I can't tell you because I don't know what that means. Will it be in the same form? Who knows? But the church itself will continue, right? We can't topple what God establishes. As Jesus tells us, the gates of hell cannot prevail against the church, even in this troubling time. So more fun stuff next week as we finally get to the last bit of Daniel. Or, Frank, you can breathe a sigh of relief. We're past the history lessons here. We're going to do some more solid theology, really, as the focus next time. So let's pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So until next time.